9/11.
Person named Osama Bin Laden.
CIA is
The biggest news of the 21st century.
Plane has crashed into the world.
This one day changed the lives of Muslims all over the world forever. On one hand, the biggest superpower of the world was America.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
And on the other hand, there is a Saudi billionaire, Osama Bin Laden.
admiration for what was then the world's most wanted terrorist, responsible for killing thousands.
This was not the first time that someone tried to demolish these two American towers, because these twin towers were one of the tallest buildings in the world at that time. And without any doubt, these buildings were the most famous buildings in the world, because inside and around this building, almost 500 Hollywood movies were made. So whoever wanted to demolish these buildings, he knew very well that when these buildings of the World Trade Center will fall in New York, then this will be the biggest news of the world to come. Like if someone demolishes Burj Khalifa today, exactly 23 years ago, the situation of the world was that the Soviet Union was broken, and China was not of that level at that time. So America was the one and only superpower of the world. There was no one in the world to challenge its power. But suddenly, on a normal day, on September 11, 2001, 19 people went to different airports to hijack 4 large American aircrafts. Looking at all the reports of the United States so far, it seems that these 19 out of 19 people were Muslims, and all this was related to Saudi, Egypt, Lebanon, and the UAE. 5 teams of people were formed to hijack each aircraft, in which everyone had a very important role. And for all this, they had been getting training for many months. So finally, these 4 aircrafts left their airports. And as soon as these aircrafts took off, these 19 people started the plan to hijack the planes. And according to the plan, after staying in the air for only 15 minutes, 5 hijackers standing in the first plane, and with some small knives and box cutters, they hijacked the whole plane very quickly. And by killing both the pilots of the plane, they made their man, Mohammed Atta, sit on the pilot's seat and pushed all the passengers of the plane to the back and told them clearly that now both the pilots of the plane are dead. So now only our man, Mohammed Atta, can land this plane. Because of which all the passengers quietly stood up, but the hijackers never wanted to land this plane. Now, when the new pilot of this plane, Mohammed Atta, was explaining this to the passengers, he accidentally pressed another button of the plane, by which he connected directly to the tower of the New York airport. And he said, "Everyone sit down. We are taking this plane to the airport." Now, hearing this, confusion spread in the airport of New York, and they quickly removed all the planes from the runway of the airport and cleared the runway and started waiting for this plane. After this, again, Mohammed Atta accidentally connected again to the tower of the airport, and he said,
Please, going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid move.
I mean, how can anyone be so relaxed in such a dangerous mission?
Nobody move, please.
Anyway, this plane was going from Boston to Los Angeles, which is a very long journey. So Mohammed Atta turned this plane 100 degrees and started moving towards New York. And as soon as he reached near the city of New York, the plane started coming down from its height very fast. And clearly everyone thought that this plane was coming down so that it could land at the airport of New York. That's why everyone was waiting for this plane at the airport. But even after a long time, the plane did not reach. And everyone at the airport was confused. That where did this plane go? So finally someone came and told them that this plane has crashed from the building of the World Trade Center. Now only the airport people knew what actually happened, but the American media did not know anything about it. That's why every news channel started broadcasting it as a very big accident. During all this, the President of America, George Bush, was sitting in a school for children in Florida, so his secretary came and quietly told him about this incident. So his first reaction was that this must be an accident. Now the first plane was hijacked just 15 minutes after takeoff, but the second plane was hijacked exactly 30 minutes after the first, and the timing of hijacking the planes was already planned, which means whoever was behind these attacks, he wanted the whole world to see the second plane crash. Marwan al-Shari, who was only 23 years old, with his friends hijacked the second plane and sat on the pilot's seat, and again turned the plane towards New York instead of Los Angeles. Now when all the world's news channels left their normal programs and were showing the crash of the first plane and were calling it a very big accident. At the same time, in front of the whole world, the second plane came at full speed and collided with the second tower of the World Trade Center. People were a little confused at first, but then slowly everyone understood that this was not an accident but an attack. And again, the American president's secretary came and told him again and said, "Mr. President, America is under attack." After this, the American army was fully alert and ordered to land all the planes in the country. But there were still 2 planes which these people had already hijacked, and no one knew what was going to be the next target of these 2 planes. The third plane, which was being flown by a Saudi citizen, Hijacker, instead of turning the plane towards New York, he turned it towards the capital of America, Washington. And as soon as he reached close to Washington, he brought his plane very low and increased the speed of the plane. And this plane was moving very fast from one of the most important buildings in the world towards the Pentagon and the world's largest, #1 intelligence agency, the CIA's headquarters. After the crash of this plane on the Pentagon, the whole world, except the World Trade Center, started showing clips of the Pentagon, but still one plane was missing. When the U.S. Army checked the direction of this plane, they saw that this plane was also moving towards Washington, and it is possible that this plane is targeting the capital of America. So to make this plane fall, 2 fighter jets were launched at full speed, and these jets were given the order that it is imperative to make this plane fall at any cost, even if all the passengers die. 3 jets had reached their targets as per the plan, but the 4th jet, which was piloted by Zaid Jarrah, could not reach its target capital, because when this plane was hijacked, the World Trade Center had already been attacked. Zaid Jarrah told all the passengers that everyone sit down, we are going towards the airport. But when one of the passengers contacted his wife over the phone, his wife told him that these hijackers are lying and they are not going to the airport. In fact, this is a suicide mission. This man went and explained to the other passengers that death is inevitable. But before these hijackers crash this plane on any building, we ourselves will make this plane fall, on which all these passengers attacked the hijackers, seeing which Zaid Jarrah started moving the plane up and down and side to side. But after a lot of effort, the passengers finally reached the cockpit door of the plane, and as soon as they were about to break the door, the pilot of this plane, Zaid Jarrah, increased the speed of the plane and turned it towards the ground. And this is how this 4th and last jet was destroyed.
With a cascade of sparks and fire, and now
the news channels of the whole world again started showing the 4th jet, and only an hour later, the South Tower of the New York World Trade Center collapsed, and about 1,000 people died. And shortly after that, the second tower also collapsed, and even in that 1,600 people died. In these 4 attacks of 9/11, 3,000 people were killed, out of which 200 people were only those who, because of the fire in this building, jumped from the top floor of the World Trade Center and died. But a few days after these attacks, Mohammed Attahu was the leader of this whole plan. His father's interview came out in which he refused to believe all this, and the entire intelligence agency of Israel put the blame on Mossad, said that there is no permission these attacks. This way, parents of the pilots of the 3rd and 4th jets also refused to believe the reports of America. And if we look at the families of these attackers, they were not ordinary poor people. But all these attackers were from very well-off rich families. This 9/11 attack was so big that 100 days after this attack, there was dust everywhere in New York. And to clean the rubble of these destroyed buildings, it took almost $1 billion. But still, because of the fall of the World Trade Center, America did not suffer so much loss. The real loss was a little away from these buildings, in another building which people always forget, and that building was New York Stock Exchange. After these attacks, panic spread in the American markets, and America's stock exchange started crashing, and almost all the country's stocks started falling, in which the biggest loss was by Warren Buffett's company, by Berkshire Hathaway. And it is said that these attacks lost $1.4 trillion to America, and America's GDP, which was growing at 4 and 5%, after the 2001 attacks came down by 1%. But now when in the stock exchange, all the companies' stocks were going down, there were some companies who profited a lot. From these attacks, and instead of loss, they profited a lot. And the shares of these companies started going up. And these companies were war companies, gun companies, fighter jets, and tank companies. Almost all the investors of America started investing their money in these companies. And why were they doing this? Because everyone knew that America would start a big war to avenge these 9/11 attacks, because of which the whole world was looking at American President George Bush. Who and why the world's biggest superpower dared to do this to America, and the whole of America was filled with anger. A few days after these attacks, George Bush came in front of the world and told everyone that there was no country or government behind these attacks, but it was a terrorist attack. And behind these attacks, there was only one organization, Al-Qaeda.
A person named Osama Bin Laden are linked to many other organizations in different countries.
And its leader, Osama Bin Laden, who was sitting far away in Afghanistan. Now, when the whole world was blaming Osama Bin Laden came in front and gave an interview to Al Jazeera saying that he had nothing to do with these attacks. But he also gave some other statements, because of which the whole world was in confusion whether he did this or not after these attacks. Not only Osama, but the whole world, and scholars came in front and strongly opposed these attacks. Because if anyone has read about the life of Prophet Muhammad, he would know that before every war, Prophet Muhammad used to give orders that during the war, no women, children, old people, and even trees should not be cut, and the priests of other religions should not be killed. Only fight those who fight you, meaning so soft-spoken and always forgiving. Prophet Muhammad, how could anyone do this in the name of religion? That's why after these attacks, OIC, the biggest organization of Muslims, came in front and also opposed these attacks of 9/11. And apart from them, even the Grand Mufti of Mecca said that these attacks are against Islam, and even the enemies of America, Ayatollah Khamenei, said that these attacks have nothing to do with Islam. But even after all this, the image of Islam started to deteriorate in Western countries, and Islamophobia started to increase. For example, people started to kill women who wore hijab on the road, and in Western countries, many Muslims were fired from their jobs, and some Muslims were even killed. And for the first time on TV, this debate started. Whether Islam is a peaceful religion or not, Islam is not a religion of peace. But even after all these things, the whole world's Muslims had the same stance, that whoever did these attacks, we are against all of this. Now, even after Osama bin Laden's refusal, America blamed Osama bin Laden. America gave an ultimatum to the Taliban that all the leaders of Al-Qaeda, including Osama bin Laden, should be handed over to America. But Afghanistan did not do this, because a few years ago, Afghanistan had defeated a huge superpower, the Soviet Union, after 10 years of war, and Osama bin Laden played a huge role in that war to help the Afghans, because of which the Taliban government, whose leader was Mullah Muhammad Umar, respected Osama bin Laden a lot, on which the Taliban told the American government that the person you are blaming, he is not admitting that he did all this. You give us the proofs, we will punish him ourselves, and without the proofs, we cannot hand over our guest to anyone. But America did not accept this offer and said, look, I am a superpower, and you are a poor country. I do not need to give you any proof. Just hand this person over to me. Otherwise, we will attack Afghanistan and finish the Taliban. Because the American generals had already done their research, that the Taliban can only stand in front of us for a few weeks, and then we will finish them. But the Taliban, being Pathan, of course they did not listen to them, so America also started planning to attack Afghanistan. To stop this war, the Taliban also tried one last time and told America that we hand over Osama bin Laden to a third country, which neither listens to you nor to us, and they can decide independently. But America was in full power and did not accept this offer. And just a month after 9/11 attacked Afghanistan, George Bush called this war
This crusade, this war on terrorism,
this war on terrorism, and started sending his army towards Afghanistan. And inside Afghanistan, the most powerful Afghan, Ahmad Shah Massoud, America fully supported his army, and as per America's plan, they took out the Taliban and conquered the whole of Afghanistan. But in the middle of all this, there was a big hurdle in America's path, the media, and especially Al Jazeera, because the entire world's media was only showing America's side. But Al Jazeera was the only channel which was showing both sides, American side and Afghan side. Al Jazeera showed such incidents on its TV in which American jets not only targeted Taliban, but civilians as well, which other channels like BBC, CNN were not showing. So this angered America's army, and just 4 weeks after the attack, they blew up Al Jazeera's headquarters in Kabul, so that Al Jazeera could not report there, and even sent one of their cameramen to the world's most dangerous prison in Guantanamo Bay, so that Al Jazeera could shut up. American generals were right, because just 3 months after 9/11, Taliban's government ended in Afghanistan, after which there was no leader. That's why America started looking for a new leader, and held a big conference in the city of Bonn, in which they also called some Afghan leaders, and from Germany. They chose a new leader, Hamid Karzai, who was the exact opposite of Taliban.
Fortunately, that didn't happen.
Means he spoke excellent English and looked like a Western man, and was a favorite of CIA America, made Hamid Karzai the new president of Afghanistan, and to strengthen his government, they trained a new army and made a new government. Taking out other governments and making your favorite government is America's old business. But if we look at the history of Afghanistan, they never accepted a foreign leader. And to top that, Hamid Karzai's government was so corrupt that the Afghan people couldn't even accept him. Everything went on like this, and it seemed like Taliban had lost. But 2 years later, in 2003, America started a new war, Iraq War.
Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours.
Due to which America's focus went away from Afghanistan and went to Iraq, where they lied to remove Saddam Hussein.
I apologize for the fact that the intelligence we received was wrong.
They still believe we will explain Saddam Hussein's story. In another video, when America's focus went away from Afghanistan, Taliban slowly started regrouping and started attacking American forces. Saddam Hussein's government ended in Iraq. But in that war, America made so many mistakes that it was impossible to hide. For example, in Iraq, some pictures were released in which American forces were treating Iraqis very badly, and these pictures spread all over the world, which ruined America's image. And in Afghanistan, Taliban used this image to convince the Afghans that this is what happens in America's prisons. When Bush went to Iraq, he was beaten up. This ruined America's image, not only in Iraq, but in Afghanistan, and Taliban got stronger. One of the reasons for Taliban's strength was that Afghanistan is a tribal society, and whenever American forces attacked an Afghan, his whole family used to go and meet the Taliban. So by killing the Afghans, Taliban used to get stronger, and their numbers had increased a lot. Now, as we said, before this, Osama Bin Laden had refused to get involved in 9/11. But before the 2004 U.S. election, a video of Osama Bin Laden was released, in which he addressed the Americans and accepted the entire responsibility of 9/11. And in this video, Osama Bin Laden prayed for the 19 people who did 9/11 and warned America that he can do it again, which means Osama Bin Laden took the entire responsibility after 3 years of 9/11. After this speech, George Bush got stronger in America's politics and won the elections. And after winning the elections, he sent his troops to attack Osama bin Laden. But for the next 4 years, neither Osama bin Laden nor the Taliban could win Afghanistan's struggle. Continued for 10 years after 9/11 and after George Bush, America's new president, Barack Obama. As soon as Obama came, instead of reducing the war, he increased it and sent more troops to Afghanistan, which increased the number of American troops to 100,000. Along with that, Obama increased drone attacks and airstrikes. And in his government, After 10 years of 9/11, America finally got a target, which was about Osama bin Laden, who was hiding in Pakistan and not in Afghanistan. Now, there are two versions of this incident. One is America and Pakistan's version, and the other is of some senior journalist. Osama bin Laden, with his 3 wives, children, and grandchildren, was living in the city of Abbottabad for the past few years, where America operated and found him and killed him, which was unknown to Pakistan's army and government. But some senior journalists like Seymour Harsh America had kept $25 million to catch Osama bin Laden. That's why a retired Colonel Iqbal Saeed Khan, for this money, delivered Osama bin Laden's location to the CIA. And to confirm this news, America started a fake vaccine campaign with Shakil Afridi in Abbottabad and started scanning this house. American drones and satellites started recording this house for 24 hours. And one day they saw a 6 feet tall man walking in the lawn. With this and some other things, America guessed that this could be Osama bin Laden. Before attacking Osama, CIA sent some Pakistani agents to this house who cut down all the trees so that America's helicopters could land. And finally, on May 2nd, 2011, on President Obama's orders, 2 helicopters from Jalalabad went to Abbottabad to kill Osama bin Laden, which was unknown to Pakistan's army. And in America, Obama and his ministers were watching this live. These helicopters landed in Osama's house and killed Osama bin Laden. Just 40 minutes of operation, and took his body back to Afghanistan, where his DNA was tested, and it was confirmed that this was Osama bin Laden. And then pictures of his dead body were thrown into the sea. According to the American army, they threw his body into the sea and did not bury him on the ground, so that no one could go ahead and build a shrine. On his grave, CIA sent pictures of Osama's body to U.S. President Obama, but he refused to release it.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
There are still many people in Pakistan who do not believe that Osama bin Laden was in Abbottabad and say that this is a big game, but this is completely wrong. Because just a few days after this operation in Abbottabad, Al-Qaeda accepted Osama bin Laden's death on their secret websites and said that we will definitely take revenge, after which the Taliban also accepted his death. And even Osama bin Laden's own son, Hamza bin Laden, also said the same. So when both America and Al-Qaeda agree to this, then what is the problem for Pakistanis? Now, Osama bin Laden had 11 sons, and his eldest son, Abdullah bin Laden, is still running his business in the city of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. But the Saudi government notes every movement of his Osama bin Laden's second son, Umar bin Laden, who publicly calls his father and his mission wrong. And he has also written a book against his father, Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden's third son, Zaid bin Laden, who used to be his father's right hand, and Osama wanted to make him the new leader of Al-Qaeda. But his son Zaid bin Laden was killed before Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden had only one son, his fourth son, Hamza bin Laden, who was one of the leaders of Al-Qaeda. And after Osama bin Laden's death, he used to give public statements from Al-Qaeda, but he was also killed in Afghanistan. Between 2018 and 2019, the family of Osama bin Laden, who was saved in Abbottabad, they were in Pakistan for 1 to 2 years, after which they were sent back to their countries. And today they are quietly living their lives in Saudi and Yemen. After Osama bin Laden's death, many documents were found from his house, in which some of his recordings and some video games for his children. Looking at these documents, it seems that Osama bin Laden already knew that one day he will be killed like this. That's why in one of these documents, his last will is also found, in which he writes, "I still have $40 million, and after me, from these $40 million, only a little should be given to my family, and the rest should be given to Al-Qaeda." Now, when Osama bin Laden was killed, and the work for which America came to Afghanistan was completed. So it should have been that he should leave Afghanistan and go back. But he didn't do that, and stayed in Afghanistan for the next 10 years, because Osama bin Laden was no longer a problem. But now the world had completely changed, and Afghanistan's very close new superpower was about to become China, and to keep China in control, America's presence in this area was necessary. Apart from this, a short time before Osama bin Laden's death, a few years ago, an American institute researched Afghanistan and found that the minerals found under the ground of Afghanistan are the most valuable and rare minerals in the world. One of the most important minerals is lithium, which makes almost all the batteries in the world. Now, if America had left Afghanistan, then China could have easily reached these minerals. That's why for the next 10 years, America stayed in Afghanistan. But still, despite America's great power, and despite such a large army, Taliban's presence in Afghanistan increased. And after a 20-year war, America's new president, Donald Trump, dealt with the Taliban government and slowly withdrew his army from Afghanistan.
We're having very good discussions with...
And after 20 years of training, Afghanistan's army couldn't stand in front of the Taliban. Even for a few days, and after a few days of America's departure, Taliban returned to their capital, Kabul. This war in Afghanistan is considered America's biggest failure, because even after 20 years of war, America made the Taliban stronger instead of weakening them. And after this war, Afghanistan got its title back as the graveyard of empires after 3,000 Americans were killed in 9/11, which started a war on terror. All over the world, 4.6 million people, 46 lakh people, have died. 4 crore people, displaced from their homes, became refugees, in which I personally, with my family and the entire city, was a refugee in 2009. Although I had nothing to do with 9/11. And if we look at the cost of this war on terror, only $2 trillion were spent. And according to Brown University's estimates, $8 trillion of America's money was wasted on this war on terror. This war on terror has harmed the American people and the people of Afghanistan and has only benefited the companies that make weapons. For example, the CEO of Lockheed, who used to earn $3 million every year before this war, but during this war his income went from $3 million to $30 million, which means in just a few years his income increased 10 times. And even today, this crusade, this war on terrorism is still going on. Subscribe to the channel for more.